Hello, very good evening. 9:03 is the time on LBC. I think I'm right in saying that this programme probably covers India more than any other show in the British media. And I do that for many reasons. First of all, I think that given the size of the Indian population, it is scandalous how India is ignored in much of the international media. It's one of the it is the world's largest democracy. Second of all, the historical ties between Britain and India mean that I think we ought to take a lot more notice of what goes on in India. And I know that we have a lot of people who listen to this programme whose families originate from India. And I'm sometimes rather ashamed of my lack of knowledge of the country. I've never been there. I'd love to go, actually. So I want to talk about it tonight because India is in dire straits at the moment. I don't think anybody would argue against that. When you look at the number of cases of COVID, when you look at how the hospitals are being overrun by people, you look at the fact that oxygen has almost run out. You look at the fact that the number of beds is clearly not adequate, and you think, well, this could have happened here. And so then you have to think, well, how has this been allowed to happen? And it seems obvious to me that there has been a massive, massive failure of political leadership. Now, the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, in a way, he's a bit like Boris Johnson in that he commands incredible loyalty and support from his supporters, but he has a lot of enemies as well. And of course, his political enemies will be looking at this and thinking, well, we told you so. And it is, I think, quite scandalous that he lifted parts of the lockdown when it was clear that that would have a devastating effect. You look at even at the weekend, there were sporting events that were having massive crowds in the Indian Premier League in cricket, for example. Now, if you do that, don't be surprised when the number of cases starts rising. And of course, they haven't seen the worst of it yet, because if there are 352,000 new cases today, that means that in a 2 or 3 weeks' time, when a lot of those cases will turn into very serious cases, the hospitals will be even more overrun. And I don't understand how politicians can get themselves into that position when it's quite clear that when you look at the figures that are coming out of, I think it was in Calcutta at the weekend, it was reported that 50% of people testing for COVID were testing positive. 50%. Now, in this country, it's less than 1%, and even at the height of the pandemic, it was less than 1%. So goodness knows how bad this situation is going to become. So, when you recognise the realities, though, what can be done? What can the international community do to help? Well, Britain is sending ventilators and oxygen equipment to India, but there needs to be a massive coordinated effort because I don't think that there's any other country in the world at the moment that is suffering like India. So 3 questions. What do you think Britain and the international community should do to help India? Given all the historical links between Britain and India, I do think that we have a responsibility to help as much as we can. Second of all, if you have family and friends in India, what are they telling you when you talk to them on the telephone, or so they email you, or have conversations on Facebook? What are they telling you about the situation on the ground? How worried are they, and how worried are you on their behalf? 0345 6060 973. Well, before we come to your calls, let's talk to Kaur Sandhu, who's General Secretary at the humanitarian organisation Khalsa Aid. They've been sourcing oxygen pumps and other supplies for people in India. Thank you very much for joining us. From what you know on the ground, how bad is the situation?
Hi, Ian. Thank you for having me. The situation is beyond desperate. We in the UK are receiving direct calls from people in India saying, please help me. My family's all COVID positive. My father, my mother is struggling for breath. I need oxygen. We have a very, very active and a very strong team in India that have worked in various disaster zones, and they are struggling to supply. A couple of days ago, we had 200 oxygen condensers, which can give temporary relief. We've distributed those. We've got more coming, but the situation is changing by the hour, it's worsening by the hour, and people simply have nowhere to go. And when we're hearing in the media of people dying on the roadsides, I'm afraid that's very true. And we're in a position now where, you know, Muslims bury their dead. There isn't space to bury people. The Hindus and the Sikhs cremate, and there isn't space for cremations to be taking place. So it's very desperate.
And is this countrywide, or is it, I mean, clearly it has to be far worse in some parts than others. I'm imagining the cities are, well, I was going to say that they might be worse affected because of the density of population. But then again, if you live in a rural area, hundreds of miles from a hospital, that's going to be a pretty dire situation too.
So we don't actually know what's going on in rural parts of India. But the news coverage that we're seeing is from places like Delhi, which you quite rightly said are very heavily populated. And the infrastructure simply isn't there to cope with the crisis. And this is a, you know, huge crisis that they just can't deal with it. It hasn't even hit rural India yet. So, you know, like you say, in a couple of weeks, when it does start hitting the rural parts, that's when we're going to see, you know, far worse situations, because there aren't hospitals or clinics for miles.
Now, given the desperate nature of the situation, is this something where it's got to be organised at a governmental level, that individual charities can do some great work, but in the end it's got to be coordinated through international organisations and through governments? Is this something where the British government could take a lead?
Absolutely. I think there's been lessons learned in terms of supporting the infrastructure. It has to go across the board from top to bottom. You know, this isn't the time to play political games or to gain political ground. This is a time, for the sake of humanity, just join hands with whoever, wherever, you know, globally, and just start saving lives, start supporting people. In this day and age, we can't have people dying for the sake of oxygen, and families being, you know, traumatized watching their loved ones dying in this way. We just can't allow that to happen. On an international level, we can't allow it.
So if there are people listening who want to help, can they do it through your organisation? If so, how?
They can. So we are sourcing oxygen condensers and oximeters, because, as you know, people panic as well. So at least if they've got an oximeter to hand, they can, you know, quickly do an assessment of actually how serious am I if they've got that oximeter in hand. So we're sourcing those. We will be shipping those out. One of our trustees is a pilot with Virgin, and we're looking at how Virgin Airlines can support us with getting goods out there. So yeah, our website is khalsaaid.org. If anybody wants to contact us, or anybody knows where we can source mass oxygen resources, equipment, we're happy to work with anybody. We just want to be able to get as much on the ground as possible, as quickly as possible. And
presumably people can donate via your website.
You can, although, you know, that's not the priority at the moment. The priority is just to get equipment that can save lives out there. So yeah, I mean,
presumably that costs.
It does, but we're very fortunate. We've got some great supporters, and, you know, the minute we start doing something, we get lots of people donating. So that's not, you know, obviously donations are always welcome, but we're really after equipment that we can get out there.
So that's Khalsa Aid, that's KHALSA aid.org. Bal, thank you very much indeed. That's Kaur Sandhu from Khalsa Aid.